What's going on, guys? Today we're going to talk about your ability or anyone's ability to predict, prevent, or reduce the risk of certain injuries occurring. I have reverted back to my old video format as I want to emphasize the charisma and maybe not just sit down and waffle as I did in the previous video. If you did enjoy the more formal, less stupid video, then by all means leave a comment in the comment section below. But by no means will this video be stupid. It'll just be me doing a lot more me stuff, which is talking with my hands and being incredibly loud. So basically, I recently had a client suggest to me that her old trainer used to call a monster walk. So like it's basically just a glute med activation exercise. Used to call that a injury prevention exercise. And this just made me really question the validity of this claim, like what really encompasses an injury prevention exercise, and can you predict injuries? I've recently had various discussions with a lot of very educated fitness professionals, so that very fast, fitness professionals on topics such as screening for injury prevention. And whilst I think that screenings are very useful, I do not think they are the be-all, end-all, and I do not think you can tell the future and know when injuries or how, well, I shouldn't say when, no one knows that, but if injuries or if you're more risk, if you're at higher risk for injuries occurring based on an objective measure, which is somewhat subjective, like a screening tool. We will talk more about that later on in the video. First, I would like to cover some just like very commonly recurring injuries or occurring injuries in the vast majority of population groups. I would like to point out that women tend to get injured more than men. It just might be just a lack of eccentric or a lack of tolerable eccentric loading. And I think that is the key for the most part. I think that if someone can improve the amount of eccentric stress that they can tolerate by increasing the amount of eccentric strength that a certain muscle has, particularly the hamstrings, which have been widely studied, I think that this is the best indicator for a reduction in the rate or a reduction or prevention in the potential for injuries to occur. I think that injury prevention, just saying this will prevent injuries, is a very, very, very sketchy thing to say. And I also think that suggesting that certain screenings will allow us to assess your risk for injuries are also quite flawed with reference to the scientific literature. So just to briefly go over the prevalence of ACL injuries amongst this population group that was studied, 30,000 of the participants had ACL injuries and 2,200 of them were collegiate athletes. It's also important to mention that a lot of these injuries that have been cited, I can link the Google Docs. I've actually written this up sort of like a blog, and I'll link it all. And there's like 30-something citations. But a lot of the time, like lower limb, like the lower body tends to be more injured than the upper body. And it's like ligaments, tendons, muscles, particularly the ankles, the knee, and the hamstrings, just to name a few little components that tend to get injured a lot. And if you're an athlete, like you'll know this from experience, I have quite a few clients and athletes, whether they be general pop or not, that have recurring knee, ankle, and hamstring injuries. Not so much hamstring actually, but knee and ankle injuries tend to be quite profound amongst various training population groups. So there's a variety of robust research that suggests that eccentrically loading the hamstrings can decrease the risk for injuries to occur with reference to the hamstrings specifically. There's also another study that showed that an increase in shoulder eccentric strength resulted in a decrease in shoulder injuries. There's also a variety of, again, robust research to show that youth athletes should participate in resistance training in order to reduce their potential for getting injured. A lot of the time, like it's fear-mongering and dogma exists with reference to the amount or children lifting weights, and this contention is flawed with reference to the research, because the research suggests that it's perfectly safe And a lot of the time, if the injury does occur, it's due to an accident, and accidents happen anywhere within the gym. It usually depends on how good the coach or trainer is, or sometimes kids can just go nuts and do way too much weight. But for the most part, as long as you have an educated fitness professional as a trainer or coach, there shouldn't really be a problem implementing resistance training for youth athletes. It's also very important to suggest that that prevention of injuries is multidisciplinary. So what that means is like a variety of like allied health pros and strength coaches and doctors and everything play a role in the injury prevention realm for the athlete. So just saying that, yeah, doing a bunch of strength exercises and doing this screening is going to be super helpful. Or, well, look, it probably will be helpful, but doing this is the be-all, end-all, it's a bit of a flawed contention with reference to all the other roles amongst like teams and stuff like that. So I think as I mentioned, like that was the key. So the key for me is just like increase in eccentric tolerable loads. And this is all well and good, but I think it's really important to also suggest like, well, can we actually stop injuries, or not stop so much, but can we predict if injuries will occur based on some screening tools? And this next bit of this video, we'll talk about screening tools, but we'll specifically talk about the FMS, the functional movement screen. I actually think the functional movement screen is really useful before everyone gets their knickers in a freaking knot. So don't get all upset. All I'm doing is citing research because this is a very like topic that everyone's like, yeah, gets all pumped. So I'm just citing some research. Don't crack the shits. I actually personally like it. I don't use it. But again, just because I like it doesn't mean it's great, and I don't think it's the be-all, end-all. I can see in some instances where I'm actually going to cite, I'm going to talk about where it would be good, like the certain population groups, like with firefighters. For some reason, it was actually pretty good. But then when we go talk about more its reliability and validity, and when we account for some very important variables, it doesn't seem to be as good. So as I mentioned, when you just look at it as a whole, like screenings, or the functional movement screen in particular with this study, it was 108 firefighters, and they did a study, and they participated in all the FMS, like all the stuff that they had to do, and they was able to predict injury. But I think one of the things about this study is it didn't really confound, or it didn't really control for a variety of confounding variables that exist with any screening. I'm going to talk about them in a tick. So before I talk about them, I just want to talk about reliability and inter-rater reliability. So reliability is how often you can do the test and get the same result for the same performance. And inter-rater reliability is when two people, let's say, do the same test and you get a similar result. So what they did in this study was they tested the intersession reliability, and what that means is they got a variety of participants. All of them undertook the FMS, and it turns out that the same task gave off similar results for the people within the study. However, when used to retest for particular movement deficiencies, certain screenings, again with reference to the FMS, I'm not bashing the FMS, it's just really popular and there's a lot of studies on it. It apparently just wasn't that great. And the studies are linked in the Google Docs form, so if you'd like to read the studies, by all means go ahead. It actually seems to be really consistent amongst like when you do it on various different people, and that's really good, but I think that the biggest flaw lies within its validity. So validity just means like, does the test actually measure what it intends to measure? Does a screening tool measure a particular movement dysfunction? So I think we can generalize these results. This is for the FMS again. These studies suggest that this was the biggest problem, but we can generalize this to a variety of screening tools, and this is basically why I don't use them. So I think the best screening tool is the exercise you're going to perform. And a major like flaw or to that is that, well, you shouldn't load dysfunctional patterns. But the pattern would never be dysfunctional, so I would never make someone do an exercise that they couldn't do. And the reason that the exercise itself is the best screening is because as soon as the loads change, as soon as the speeds of movement change, as soon as anything about the movement changes, the transferability and generalizability of a screening becomes questionable. Because you're not screening the movement or the athletic task, you're screening the screening. So basically, when you perform a screening, you just get better at the screening. And whether or not you get better at the screening, whether or not that means you actually become more injury resilient or your injuries become more predictable is questionable. I do understand I do get it. I think that this is sort of useful. You know, like if someone can do a hurdle step and not wobble their hips around and score quite well on these tests, I think that's fantastic. And I think that they'll present with generally better like motor learning competence and kinesthetic awareness. But I do not see how that would, and this is, I guess you could say that was hypocritical, because if someone presents with better motor learning and like kinesthetic awareness, then surely that then they will be more injury resilient. But I don't think that is the case, and clearly it isn't, because the research suggests that context and construct validity, so does the test actually measure what it intends to measure within its own construct and context, is very flawed, and it turns out that it doesn't actually. So I think to conclude, I actually do understand the implementation of certain screening tools. And we're not just talking about one screening tool, we're talking about them in general, because I think you certainly can generalize these results to a variety of screening tools. The best screening tool is the exercise, in my opinion, and I think that for most of these topics like posture and all this stuff, I think and screenings and correcting dysfunctions, and I've talked about why I don't really like all that stuff in the past, but I think that the biggest issue is a lack of movement and a lack of tolerable eccentric loading or strength. I hope you guys found that video informative, and I hope you guys really like the more unformal form. It's still sort of formal, you know, I kind of got some research going and stuff. Anyway, I will speak to you in the next one, TTFN. I'll link because this is quite a debatable topic, but I'll link everything in the description. TTFN, ta for now.